the Esports Trade Association's latest LinkedIn Live, courtesy the Education Committee. Tonight, we're going to be talking about disability and inclusion and looking at how we can possibly break down the barriers. And we're looking at experiences and things that we actively know are going on, and hopefully identify things that need to be improved. First, I'd like to thank my panel. I've got a great group of people on this evening to discuss all of their things. So to start with, I'm Nick Turner, the chair of the Education Committee at the Esports Trade Association. But I'd like to start by introducing Lewis. Lewis, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Lewis Bailey Douglas. I'm the programme leader for games at College of Esports in Stratford in London. I've worked for a charity called Special Effect, or volunteered for a charity called Special Effect, since I was 16, which was the grand total of 15 years ago at this point, who look to work with people with physical disabilities to give them access to gaming. And then I'm now looking to include some of their practice in what we do in the esports space at university. Obviously, being a qualified teacher, I work with students across all sorts of demographics and backgrounds, and so I need to consider their needs in terms of educational outcome. So
excellent.
That's a good roundup.
That's an excellent roundup, Lewis. And Robbie, did you want to tell us about kind of like your involvement and what you're doing?
Sure. So I'm Robbie. I work at Prestige Network, and we're a language services provider, and that means we deliver interpreting and translation support across a range of sectors, from public service interpreting to corporate and events-based language access. So I joined the team about 8 months ago, and I've been leading efforts to make our services more relevant to the gaming and esports world, which is where my background is based. I'm a gamer myself, and I've seen how exciting this space is across my journey of growing up. But I often see how accessibility gets left out. So my focus is helping organisers and educators build in British Sign Language access and broader communication support, especially for the deaf and hard of hearing audiences.
Brilliant. And for those of you that are familiar with the Esports Trade Association, the next lady needs little introduction. But Megan, if you'd just like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Nick, and everyone. It's so great to be here today and participate. I always appreciate the topics that you are so thoughtful about, Nick. You've made such an incredible chair and such a great global impact and difference for us. So I hope I add some value today to our conversation.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Megan. And last but by no means least, Alex, did you want to just introduce yourself and tell us about you?
Sure. I'm Alexander Nathan. I'm the founder of Permaston Gaming. And as such, we are the largest esports organization for people with disabilities. We do all sorts of community activities, but also try and organize disabled people so that they can form teams and be part of esports in a general way.
Okay, excellent. And it's a privilege to have you all on the show this evening. And I'm going to stick with you to start with, Alex. So talk to me about your background and how you got involved and how you sort of founded your organization. When did that happen? Just tell us about kind of like your journey, if you like, to this point.
Well, I've always been a gamer. When I was very young, I was part of an administrative team for a private server for Ragnarok Online, and became a staff manager there, and also studied psychology, where you can also learn how to form teams and run an organization democratically. That really set me off to learn the basics on how to found Permaston Gaming. But that really only happened when I became aware of that there was an actual need for such an organization. Made a post on Reddit, it blew up, got a little bit lucky, and there we are, Permaston Gaming.
And at that point, because I think we've probably all been somewhere where we've put something in a forum or posted something on social media, and unbeknown to us, it just strikes a match with people and it ignites something. At that point, what was it that you kind of decided to do? How did you decide to respond to that?
It ignited a passion in me. So it just, from that moment on, it became my obsession to make esports more accessible. And it really happened one thing after another. One of the first things that happened was that the Dutch news network NOS made a little bit of a report on me. And then more and more people started contacting me on Reddit saying, hey, I don't just play Dota, because it started off on a Dota subreddit. I play Counter-Strike. Do you want to, can you support me in that too? So from looking for members for a Dota team, I went from to looking for members for a Counter-Strike team, and then Fortnite, and all sorts of other games. And before I knew it, my Discord server that I had set up and all sorts of other social media accounts to make an online presence, it just snowballed. Yeah.
And how many rosters are you running at the moment?
At the moment, we have dialed it down. We are very much a community-driven organization. So in order for a team to form, they need to also organize themselves. And I do it this way because in the end, I was micromanaging over 30 people, trying to connect them at the same time. And that really burned me out for a while. So I needed to take a step back and reevaluate what I had built, and in such a way that it could organize and function with me putting in less work.
Sounds like a good plan. And I think I'm going to come to you in a second, Robbie. But first, I'm going to go over to Lewis. Now, I'm sure most gamers, certainly in the UK, will know of Special Effect. I certainly do. I've been to many events with them. So just talk to me about how you got involved with Special Effect in the first place, and then you can go on to kind of like talk about some of the things that you've seen, some of the things that you've seen them achieved, and the benefit that Special Effect has done.
Yeah, so like I say, I first kind of came across Special Effects a long time ago, back when Eurogamer used to be in London at the Eden Hall, and I was 16, and I kind of saw them doing a Colin McRae dirt rally time trial style event, and thought, this is cool. I love the idea of playing a console with my chin, because they were demoing some kit for someone who was paralyzed from the neck down, and it was kind of time trial to get around the little track. So that's how it started. And I just immediately fell in love with what they were doing and how they were going about it. It wasn't about, oh, look at us, we just do deal with people with disabilities, and we're only going to allow people to come up and have a go and use this kit if they have a disability. It was like, no, this is just normal kit used in slightly different ways. And that really appealed to me from just an inclusivity point back then. Where my work with them really started to kind of become proper volunteering and going to events for them and talking about what they did was when I actually worked in the games industry. So I worked for Rockstar Games for a little while, and during my first year there, I broke one of my hands doing a stupid kind of silly stunt in the car park and things like that, and I messed up my thumb, and I couldn't hold a controller and all this kind of stuff. And so what I suddenly realized with a job where at that time I was a QA tester, so you need to hold a controller and play games. Suddenly I'm going, I can't do what I am being paid to do as a job, but also what I do as a hobby. And I suddenly found it very isolating when all my friends were gamers and things like that. So I reached out to Special Effects and was like, look, I'm in a bit of a pickle at the moment. I effectively only have one hand because my other hand by this point was completely splintered up, and immobile for 9 weeks. And they were like, cool, we're going to send you some one-handed gear and we'd love you to give some feedback on it. from like a quote unquote professional gamer. Not that I would say I was a good gamer, but certainly someone who worked in that space. And that was how it kind of started. I worked closely with the team, and they gave me some mice that were one-handed, a controller that was one-handed, and I had to play with them and gave them some feedback about it. But also suddenly realized that actually, if I was full-time physically disabled, how isolating this could be if my life had been gaming and suddenly this was the case. And so that's how my volunteering took me. So over the years, I've worked with loads of people that they've worked with, and right from young kids who were born with their disability, right the way through to adults who've become physically disabled due to a car accident or because of their job in the army or whatever it might be. And the one thing that it's really shown me is as soon as you give someone the tools to work with their body and how their body operates, it levels that playing field. Like Alexander was saying, it's just about giving everyone access. And as soon as they've got access, you know, the 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds that we've seen who might have lost their arm or been born with limited motor function suddenly becomes a normal kid who just wants to be the cheekiest chappy under the sun and try and beat you at wrestling. I do say try, because just because they're disabled, it doesn't mean we don't all then still try and win the game. And that's the great thing about it, is it becomes fun and it becomes engaging, but also it becomes a way for you to suddenly go, well, hang on a minute, we can improve this person's world by simply allowing this new piece of technology to come in, or utilizing existing technology in a slightly different way. And certainly when me and you were a bit younger, Nick, there was less of that about, whereas we've now seen, you know, the likes of Sony, the likes of PlayStation, the likes of Nintendo go, actually, this is a market opportunity for us, but also something that anyone can utilize to improve their play style. So we've seen the adaptable controllers come out, and we've seen the research being done with those to allow people to go, I want to now play Call of Duty on a particular setup or whatever it might be. And it's that freedom. And I think that's what it's all about, really, right? That's what we want to do with gaming. It's an escapism tool for all of us.
Yep.
It doesn't really matter about your kind of space, but it's using it to escape from that day to day. And so that's where it kind of started from. I appreciate I've rambled a little bit there, but that's the beauty of this, is it's seeing that twigging moment where people suddenly go, I can do what I see them doing, and I've not been allowed to do that before.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on a few things that we'll come back to, and you know, at that point, having mentioned special effect, you know, I think the beauty of special effect is that as a charity, there's no cost to the user. You know, it is all funded. You know, it's an incredible service. I'm going to switch over to Robbie now, because as Robbie introduced himself, and so you'll already know that he works with the deaf and hard of hearing community. Now, when we mention disability and inclusion, I would imagine, Robbie, and maybe I'm speaking from my own experience, the hard of hearing and deaf people isn't the first thing that comes to people's minds when it comes to gaming. So I'm really interested to hear what you're doing in your role, and kind of like the impact or the issues, the struggles that community faces, you know, on an everyday basis.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing I will say is that speaking from a perspective of deaf or hard of hearing gamer is something I first of all can't do personally, and I wouldn't want to misrepresent anyone or anyone's views, but yeah, we do speak to you know, a lot of clients and a lot of BSL users, and the main problem on our side is mostly organizational. We often see interpreting or accessibility being added as an afterthought for these gaming events, and not part of the initial planning, and that leads to all sorts of issues like last minute interpreter bookings and no technical setup to display the interpreter on screen, or even a mismatch between the interpreter and the subject matter, because in esports, where the language is fast, niche, and high pressure, it can make the support feel disconnected if you don't have the right language used. So our role basically is to help the organizers think about the access the same way they think about the audio or the lighting or the stage design. Basically letting people know that it's a core part of the production and not a bolt-on. So yeah, the issues stem around that kind of area. But we also do provide the cultural awareness training for organizers and presenters. Things like understanding what language is appropriate and avoiding stereotypes, or how to brief an interpreter properly. This is kind of the roundup for that.
And so when you first sort of like got involved in the gaming side of your role, what was it that your sort of clients, customers, what was it that they were saying to you? What were they kind of coming to you as with a problem that they would like to hopefully get solved?
Mm-hmm. So, it started off as users, British Sign Language users. There was no representation / accessibility for, let's say, we'll use gaming events as the prime example, because that's the main one. They'd turn up and not be able to be included, and they were excluded from the event as a whole. And from that, there's so many problems that arise. We'll go from our perspective on one part of it, but when no one's accepted, there's the inability to connect and engage, and therefore return. Why should they come again if they're not being heard or included in any way? So there's so many damaging parts of that, and I really look to address that wholly.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And Megan, in your role as the founder of the Esports Trade Association, I'm guessing, so I am assuming here, that you've dealt with or had to deal with or been involved with, spoken to, had discussions with a range of different individuals and or organizations with regards to kind of like disability and inclusion.
Yeah. Of course, we have been working with different hospitals and doing awareness around programs since the inception of the association. And, gaming is so awesome in the sense that if we just look at the hearing impaired, there are so many things that can be done in the game itself. We learned this at the hospital, like visual cues and vibrational feedbacks. There's lots of different indicators, like screen indications, and instead of a sound, it might be a footstep. So it's so. I bring all those examples because when a child or a person or any of us, even as adults, feel included and can participate in something that they might not normally be able to be as competitive in and have a fair advantage versus an unfair advantage. It's so exciting. It's, I grew up with brothers that were bigger and stronger than me, but not at some games. There were some things where I had a competitive equalness with them. So I just love this topic. I apologize for being long-winded, but it's really one of the best days of the year when we get over to the hospital.
Excellent. And I just wanted to raise a comment Martin Birch Foster has just made. Hello, Martin. Language is a big barrier for Martin. They have BSL users in esports for our course, but the language and terminology is a big barrier for us. Now, again, sort of gaming technology and comms and those sorts of things is something that I hadn't thought of. I was thinking much more general, because I'm assuming, Robbie, to find interpreters who can kind of like translate that level of jargon is another problem for you. Would I be right?
You are correct. Yeah, it totally. There's already a set pool of BSL interpreters within the UK, and then to be able to use certain language, you do limit your pool, and then building the availability around that's another problem with that, because the BSL interpreters are so busy, booked up calendars that it does become a hassle here and here trying to pull strings, getting these things in place.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Well, I mean, just based on that, the opening answers that we've had, there was two things that really stood out for me. Lewis, you mentioned isolating. Robbie, you mentioned inclusion. Megan, you put about fair, level playing field. I'd like to come to you, Alex. Would isolating be the correct word? Is that the biggest issue for most gamers, especially those gamers who maybe don't have access or aren't aware of access of some of the support and technology that can help?
I think that's a good word to describe what is going on with disabled people in general. So first of all, of course, we have physical barriers that are difficult to overcome. That's something the government needs to take care of. And then there's also the lack of awareness of disabled people that there are solutions in place that they have access to if they know where to look. So from a advocacy point of view, we need to reach disabled people to make them aware. And again, governments could help with this by giving us more funding to create advertisements, for example. I think that would be a really big help.
Yeah, and from having worked at Special Effect, and volunteered at Special Effect, Lewis, is there like a realization when some of their the people that they work with kind of like, and they get to, I know that Special Effect will go and do home visits, or the person will come in. Is at that point, do you see that kind of recognition of, I didn't know that these people existed. I didn't know that we could get this level of help, and this is amazing.
For sure, I think there's two kind of twofold for that. There's actually one of the people with disability themselves suddenly realizing that this kit is out there and there's an ability for them to kind of join in. That is kind of upsetting that it's not known about. We talk about the fact that Special Effect is well known now and things, but there's still people who've never come across them. But there's people in, both me and you are teachers. There's quite a lot of people in the education world who haven't heard of this or haven't considered this as a thing. And I think that's where we need to be talking about it. And certainly at the governmental level, like Alex highlights, is those kind of having the signposting in place through these is key. I think the other thing is the realization that things that we take for granted or we utilize in a very limited fashion can be used in these ways. So some of the eye tracking technology that is becoming more and more commonplace, particularly on newer mobiles and things, is exactly the same sensors and equipment used for people who are bedbound because of their disability or have very limited motor functions because of their disability. And by allowing them to utilize this tech, they can suddenly control a computer no different to you or me with a keyboard and mouse, and become a skilled user in that way. One of the girls I'm thinking of who worked with Special Effect was had cerebral palsy, and she had used this to design 3D characters in 3ds Max and then 3D printed them. Well, in the nicest way, it's more than I can do, and I teach games for a living. So it's that kind of, it's showcasing this kit in that way, and it's suddenly going, actually, this can help for all sorts of different people to give them access to something. And I think it's something that Robbie and Megan picked up on there, is that it almost needs to be, we take it back to basics. As a games designer myself and someone who teaches in this space, we look at UI inputs and we look at how people interact with these programs and these games from a very visual perspective, but actually those things all relate to a UX design pyramid that is all about the end user. And so one of the things that we need to take maybe back to basics and to the lower levels of that pyramid is very much okay, what's the needed thing here? If that needed thing needs to be 2 or 3 things, not just one, well then let's build that with the basis. And then anything that comes from that is suddenly better, but it includes everyone from the get-go. And I think that's the big thing. Like Robbie said, you don't want it to be a bolt-on. And as technology changes and improves, we should be thinking about that in a more adaptive kind of way. Because hey ho, like I said, I got into work with special effect because I broke my hand. That was only 9 weeks. That was not my lived experience for my entire life. And I felt like quite isolated. So by allowing us to kind of think about it in that way, well, disability is not always something you're born with. It can be developed because of a life-changing event, or it can be, over time. So we need to factor that into this conversation as well, of actually how do we encourage people to improve or allow them to kind of connect and improve over time. And so having those kind of stop gaps is a big element there as well to that individual user experience.
Brilliant. And I recently attended a disability and inclusion event at the University of West London. And one of the questions that I had lined up for today, thankfully, George Lewin has put it in the comments. Should there be separate divisions or accommodations for players with disabilities in competitive esports, or should full integration be the goal, just like how football has blind football? Now, when this question was asked and discussed at the event, I was quite kind of like interested and surprised at the same time. So I'd be interested to hear kind of like the panel's views. If we could start with you, Alex.
This is not a new question. Something I've been asked a couple of times myself. And my answer is full inclusion should be the goal, but it's probably not realistic right now. I think that what these Paralympics are doing, creating classifications based on physical ability, might be the best way to go forward for esports for disabled people. But we should definitely not exclude them from general esports events that cater to non-disabled people. I think technology is a great way to bridge the gap between disability and those who are not disabled.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. And I think kind of like in terms of the technology, that it involves government support in order to make that happen and make it more accessible to everybody. And I think you're 100% right when you say full inclusion, but we've got lots of steps to get through first before we can reach that goal, because the industry just isn't prepared or ready for it. But I'm glad to hear you say that, Alex. And, and it was a similar answer. Yeah, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, and technology isn't there yet. And you have to also realize that gaming is part of esports, but esports is also the tournament organizers and it's society as a whole. So those are the 3 pillars that I usually advocate for when I'm asked, how do we make esports more accessible? It's not just gaming, it's gaming developers, hardware developers, society, and tournament organizers. Those are the 3 key components.
Yeah, and Robbie, did you have any thoughts on that question?
Well, I mean, I pretty much agree with what Alex said. From a BSL point of view, and taking into like competitive esports as an example, I'm not sure too much about that area, because I'm just trying to think how that would be applicable. Because a lot of BSL users use live captioning, and on a competitive front, I'm not too clued up with that just yet.
Yeah, there's still lots of questions to be answered. And Lewis, like with your experience of all the students, and I know there's one of my former students who's now with you. You know, kind of like, I'm guessing you have those conversations, or they have those conversations with you.
Yeah, we have this discussion fairly regularly. I think it's obviously a complex situation, no different to, in some ways, the Paralympics is a complex issue for some individuals. I think at the moment, Alex is right. The technology isn't there to necessarily allow it. I think also some of it depends entirely on the game. You know, we talk about esports as if it's one blanket field, but actually it's 40, 50, 60 games that people play, all of which with different kind of outputs. So I can think of examples where they've got full inclusivity. Some of the 2K events that have happened before. I don't know if you've come across the team, the Quad Gods, who are based over in the States, who are all individuals in power wheelchair. They're all power wheelchair users, and they've competed against able-bodied teams at multiple events and, quite frankly, trashed them in some tournaments. And that's perfectly fine because the games they're playing have a limiter on the software side, so it doesn't really matter what hardware you're using. We have seen instances, though, in some lower level kind of professional esports leagues where, because inclusive tech hardware usually has things allowed to turbo it and stuff like that, that's caused some issues and things like that. And there's a gray area at the moment as far as the rule set, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult. Unlike sports, where there's clear delineation of rules, esports is still learning because it's so new as to what it wants to do with it, and I think that's a big element of it. I think, like Martin has put in the comments, I don't know if you've seen this, there's a lot of students who they want that full integration because they want equality across the board, and I think that's really, really fair. So thank you for doing that, Martin. You've saved me saying it. Because that to them is the key. But I think this is also where we look at it from, as educators, we need to go, how can we be inclusive of everyone in the space? So we're not just talking physical disability, we're talking things like individuals who are deaf and BSL users. We're talking about people who are partially sighted. We're talking about people who also are need to be included because of their socioeconomic background. You know, there's kids who maybe are completely new to a lot of this technology, and esports is a terrifying place for them because, let's be honest, we all like our shiny RGB and all our new toys, and they come from a background where, you know, this is completely new to them. So we need to factor those things into it as well, and it needs to be more of an accepting place. And I think that's long term where we're going to go, is that full integration with esports and games. But there's going to be certain nuances to it for certain things, just because it's such an amalgamation of one level of bureaucracy on top of another.
Yeah, and I think if you look at kind of like the Olympic Games and the Paralympics, and the way that the Paralympics has evolved, and all of the kind of like the nuances, like you say, the categories, that, you know, all of those sorts of things, and that's taken a long time to get where it is. You know, and esports is still embryonic, really. I've got a question for you, Megan. In your role, obviously you attend a lot of events of you know, whether they're tournaments or conferences or, you know, other esports and gaming related events. And I don't want to put you on the spot at all, but, you know, have you, at any of these events, have you seen things, or have you seen anything that has kind of like jumped out at you in terms of a lack of accessibility for disabled attendees? You know, that you kind of like of you know, I've seen a few where I'm a little bit kind of taken aback, you know, and just wondering, because obviously you attend probably a lot more events than I do. Have you seen anything along the way?
Let me share this, and that's a great question. You know, to answer it, of course, we're not where we need to be. You know, we just aren't. Awareness and obviously platforms like this are very important that we keep it real. But here's what I'm going to say. What I know more now than I saw when I was in school, per se, was we all know how it feels to be picked last. We all know how it feels to not be included. And it's a really bad feeling when you're last chosen on a sports team or in gym class. If you haven't been there, you're not keeping it real here. We've all been there. We all know. We're all afraid someone's not going to come to our birthday party. It's happened to every one of us. But here's what is changing. What's changing is the awareness of each other and ourselves. And what I have seen more than ever in my life and in any industry is when we are behind in something, we're aware. We're stopping, we're slowing down, we're catching up for each other, we're caring. That's the kind of community gaming is. We can talk all day about what we're not, but I'll tell you, this is a great community, and we're here to learn what we are missing. And I'm here to say, what's my blind spot, Nick? Thanks for doing this. Let me be right here, and how can I make a bigger difference? Because we don't even know what we don't even know, but we never forget how something made us feel, and we're working on that.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, and it's kind of provoked another question. And you know, when I speak to students or rooms of people who aren't familiar with esports and games, I always use the phrase that, you know, like you said, Megan, esports, the esports community, the gaming community is great. It's one of the best communities in the world. However, it can also be the most toxic communities in the world. And I think we can't ignore that. And I think certainly from, I think probably most people have been on the other end of that. I'd like to come to you, start with you, Alex, you know, in terms of toxicity, you know, talk to me from your perspective.
When I talk to some people who are not disabled, they think that, I mean, there's obvious ableism in some people, and they say that what we're doing is pointless. It's never gonna happen. Our goals are too ambitious, but they don't know the reality that we live.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say things as something like, you don't survive with a disability unless you see the truth. And we, as disabled people, we see how the world really is, and we know what the limitations are, because if we don't survive, right? So when these people, they talk to me, and I just have to really explain to them, get in their brain and really pry out those lies that they hang on to. And that's one of the toxic sides of esports, because people, they pride themselves sometimes a little bit too much in knowing it all, in being the best. It's a competitive mindset, after all. You want to be the best, you have to practice hard, and then you'll get good. But that's another truth that is revealed when you're disabled, is you can practice as much as you want. If your environment doesn't allow you to compete, doesn't allow you to climb the ladder, the competitive ladder, it's no point. There's no point in getting good. So that's the ableist side, but sometimes also internalized ableism for disabled people. And that's also a toxic trait. If you keep yourself down. I hope that's a little bit an answer to your question.
Yeah, and it did. And it actually, some of the things you said gave me goosebumps. I'm not going to lie. Robbie, do you get similar? You know, do your sort of like the people that you work with, do they talk about like toxicity that they might receive?
Honestly, I haven't heard any directly to me any lived experiences of, you know, toxicity and such within the gaming space. Only within the non-gaming space, and that would just come down to the general, you know, people just not being inclusive towards a deaf or hard of hearing individual, not taking into account them kind of being as a person, which is incredible. I can't believe that people would, you know, they can't physically see that there may be a disability there, so they'll just go free reign, which is it's crazy. But yeah, in the gaming space, I haven't heard direct feedback to me regarding toxicity, but I know there is a lot of it. Alex, thank you for sharing that. That's it's we're 2025 and things like this are still going on. We're really in a spot where we can pave forwards how things should be going. And on that front, it's a great time to be in this sphere because we're in the driver's seat trying to really fix this. But there are a lot of funding issues and there are a lot of outward issues and pressures that are tough to address. But here we are.
Yeah, and that's great, Robbie. You make a great point. And Nick, like I'd love to add on to Robbie. I think that's what one of the reasons why there's the toxicity is the not being together in person. So that getting together in person and feeling safe when you get there is one of, as you know, Nick, you've been to our events. It is the big fat Greek wedding movie. If there's any sort of culture that I probably said the name wrong. The big Greek love.
My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Yes, thank you.
Exactly.
There's two of them.
Yes, yes. And that's important. That's the culture we try to achieve as a community membership that is supportive. And when you're with someone, it's just different. There's the ability to really be present and be together, which is I think healing and creates stronger community. And that's one of our passions, which is so important. And we don't want to lose that.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah, of course you can.
Just because I think there's a few things that I have been picked up on across the board there that I think are where we need to maybe have a conversation about the esports to gaming kind of thing. Because I think what Robbie's saying as far as gaming being, that's my experience. Gaming, people don't desperately care what your color, creed, race, religion, any kind of thing, because you're sat behind a screen, and as long as you're killing someone in Call of Duty and supporting that team, they don't care. Whereas esports, because of the innate nature of the competitive side of it, I think that's where it can be almost negative. But this is also where I think esports needs to consider its fan base side of things a little bit more. So I've, quickly off to one side on the second screen, I'm having a look to see, is there any examples of people actually or companies using BSL language interpreters at major events? And the only one I can find is one Riot event with CB LOL, which is not even one of the major regions. I'm sure I'll get hate from someone for that, but it's a one-off kind of thing that they've done, and it's not considered as part of the fan experience. We've been talking a lot about player experience here, but what about fan experience in esports? And I think by having that visual, you suddenly see that esports has such a diverse fan base. I think where the gaming side of thing comes from is what kind of Alex was getting at there and Megan was getting at, is we need to remember that gaming is a big happy family, and it involves people from all sorts of backgrounds, and therefore we should be more open to going, it doesn't matter what kind of hardware or software you're using in order to allow you to game. It's about being able to game, right? And even if you are physically able, actually you might find it more useful to use a particular type of handset or a particular type of keyboard or mouse, or control a stick with your mouth or whatever it might be. I have played more Mario Kart with my chin from years of volunteering with special effect than actually I am now better with my chin than I am with my hands. Because to me, it's actually quite a comfortable motion, and it almost gets me more involved. Well, suddenly, like Megan says, by getting people in a room and getting them to experience this, now if I'm sat next to someone who they're, a gold or a plat in a particular game, and they've been using adaptive controllers because of their physical disability, they are a lot better than I am. Their rank might not say it, but actually they are. And that's the difference, is suddenly we're going, this is where going back to the kind of the Olympics question is how do these groups work and all that kind of stuff. But this is what we need to consider as part of this of what are we measuring with this. If it's esports, yes, there's an innate competitive nature there, and I think that needs looking at in a bit more detail. But then we need to consider the fan side of it, whereas the gaming side of it, it's just about getting involved and getting everyone to the table.
Yeah,
and that's what we need to remember.
Yeah, and I think the fan base is a really good point, and especially at kind of like at major events. And the discussion that I had a few weeks back at a conference about disability and inclusion was somebody raised the issue of kind of like autistic gamers. Now, I have a profoundly autistic 17-year-old son, so I'm very familiar with autism, and and also through education, a lot of youngsters on the spectrum are very into their gaming and the social communication benefits that it gives them, and they kind of like they enter a different world and kind of like deal with the world and communicate differently than they do in the real world. And somebody said at the conference, the thing is, if you look at these big events, where does somebody who has autism, or who may have sensory issues relating to lights and sound, how are they able to attend? Because it's all lights and it's all sound. Like there is, how do we get around that? There's, I've never, you might have a platform, somewhere on the central thing for those with physical disabilities who might be in wheelchairs to sit, but like those on the spectrum won't attend for those reasons, because what they actually need is somewhere where they can dampen that sound and dampen those sensory issues that they're dealing with. And it just goes to show the kind of like the diverse, all the different threads when you're talking about disability and inclusion. This panel could be 50 big, and we still probably wouldn't cover everything. And I think that's important to remember. So, discussions like this are really important, because like all it's, we're just trying to like chip away at things, expose things, talk about stuff, make people aware of things that we hadn't thought about. Certainly for me, we've had some things tonight that I hadn't really considered, and I've done a fair amount of work on, within this area. I'm conscious of the time, so and I'm also conscious that we all have plenty to say, but I'd like to kind of like finish with a question. I haven't decided what that question is yet. Finish with a question. So I'll ask you to kind of like try and wrap it up relatively quickly. I'm going to give you two questions, actually. One, if you could choose one or answer them both very briefly. Somebody mentioned in the comments, and again, something that I know happens in the background and might relate especially to you, Robbie, is, are publishers doing enough within their games when they're designing their games? I know there are loads of settings that most of us don't even look at, don't even think about to help, but, are they doing enough? And then the other one would be, well, no, I suppose the other question would be, if there's one thing that you would like to see happen, what would that be? And I'm going to start with you, Robbie.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, what I'll do is I'll answer your first question, because that like on my end, there's so many organizational things, like I've said, but the space that I'm connected with, there are loads of indie companies that are taking this into account from the get-go, which is great. But then, once they start considering this stuff, the problems of budgets start arising, and then layoffs, and a lot of problems seem to come up when small companies tackle this without a proper plan and or long-term strategy with it. It's really hard to say how they should go about doing it, because the EA, let's say EA, Ubisoft, they're going about it in ways that are great. There are great ways they're going about, let's say, BSL and hard of hearing inclusion, but executionally, I can't speak from, but I don't know how well it's doing. As well as, a problem people say is that it only affects a small group of people, and then that is in itself a problem, because it already negates so many things. So if this is taken into account right away, it improves clarity, professionalism, and the forward experience for everyone. So small doesn't mean insignificant. in these cases. It's some of these guys are the most passionate, engaged, and loyal fans from these communities, and these big studios often overlook them because they're just a small percentage. But inclusion isn't about fixing something broken; it's about unlocking value that's already there. These companies and maybe some startups don't quite get that. So I think bringing attention to that and promoting these things is what the heart of that, I would say, is.
Okay, brilliant. And over to you, Alex.
I would like to answer the second question. What's the one thing I would like to change? And that's that esports recognized as an actual sport by the governments in the world. We've seen it in Ukraine before everything happened. They recognized esports as a sport, and it allowed to create a very inclusive environment for disabled gamers. Automatically, funds were freed up. Rules about disability would maybe allow disabled gamers to recognize a gaming PC as sports equipment, which maybe in some countries lifts a capital cap on disability funding for what do you call it? Disability benefits. So in the Netherlands, you're not allowed to have more than 2,000 euros worth of savings. If you have more, then you lose your benefits, or at least part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And owning a car and other things count towards that. So it's very limited, and recognizing it as a sport could lift some of these restrictions as well, allowing people with disabilities to be part of esports, and also helping nonprofit organizations that enable disabled gamers to be part of esports.
Yeah, excellent point, Alex. And then Lewis.
Yeah, so I think my kind of answer to it is it's kind of tied in that I think we are in a position where we're starting to see more companies recognize that this is something they need to do. Like I mentioned, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo all having hardware now that's readily available. You can buy it on Amazon right away and get it next day delivery and all that kind of stuff. But we should be doing more. And I think also we're in a unique position in comparison to so many others where we exist at the cutting edge of tech and arguably a lot of science generally. So most of us are fairly comfortable AI users, and I'd like to see what we can do with that to allow ease of access for individuals. I'd like to see it being incorporated more into game development. We already have a lot of accessibility controls now put into games, particularly AAA games, whether that's colorblind mode or whatever it might be, or subtitles and changing the font of the subtitles and color and all that kind of stuff. But there's more to be done there, and I think this is where things like using AI can really help the exposure to people. I think the NHL for the first time last year finally had a broadcast which had ASL on it. That NHL has been going a lot longer than esports has, and we're already kind of doing that. But then, is there ways that we could do that on every stream with an AI kind of portion next to it of a person doing BSL, ASL, whatever it might be, depending on the region? That's something that we can look at much easier than a lot of traditional sports and a lot of traditional kind of entertainment groups. So I think that's things that we should be doing, and that's something that we should grow. I think what Alex says as far as funding and government oversight is concerned is definitely true. I think we're all aware that countries are tightening their purse strings, and in doing so, one of the first things they seem to kind of inhibit is funding for minority groups, particularly disabled individuals. And I think that needs to change. We need to recognize that we should be helping individuals, not hindering them, because that empowers everyone else to access things in different ways, and we access their stories and understand their stories much better. So yeah, that would be kind of my answer holistically.
Okay, brilliant. And then finally, Megan, you are free to answer those two questions alternatively or as well as this is your opportunity just to talk briefly about Esports Trade Association.
Well, this has been a very powerful conversation. I'd like to talk just lastly. I loved everybody's comments, and I've loved this show about inclusion and what it really is. And if you look it up, it's an act of love when we choose to include others across different abilities, race, gender, culture, background, identity, whatever. You know what we're saying when we include people? We're saying you belong here, you matter, and you're worthy. And that's love in action. And love just isn't about affection. It's about recognition, respect, compassion, and making space, listening deeply. I love the cat. The cat is really feeling it. We're reshaping, like a lot of people talk about, we're reshaping our products, our systems, so everyone has a seat at the table, and not out of charity, out of justice, and out of care. It's the clearest expression of love and community that we can make. And I think you probably knew that would be my comment, Nick.
Excellent. Right. Well, now it just leaves me to wrap things up. I want to say a massive thank you to Alex, Lewis, Robbie, and Megan for a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. We could have gone on for ages and talked about so many other things, and maybe it's something that we'll revisit, moving forward. And like in everything that you do, I know, I've got a panel of people here who do care about these things, and do as best as they can to support those with disabilities and to enhance inclusion. And for that, I thank you all. And it's time to say good evening and good lunchtime or good afternoon, depending where you are. But thanks very much, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you. It's been great.